everyone, my name is Gabe Rivas, and today I'll be taking you through the steps to configuring a terminal access server. So the agenda for this presentation is number 1, to provide a quick understanding of what a terminal access server is. Number 2, we'll take a look at how we can configure a 2600 ISR router as a terminal access server, the type of module and cable we need. And number 3, we'll take a look at the AS2511 RJ45 router, the type of adapter and the type of cable we need to make it work as a terminal access server. So on to bullet number 1. What is a terminal access server? A terminal access server is a router that gives you centralized access to many devices that you want to configure. For example, let's go back to the first slide. If you take a look at this picture at the very top, you see it's a 2600 series router that has been configured as a terminal access server. What happens here is, let me go back to this picture here. You get a network module, which is model number NM16A, where A stands for asynchronous. This module gives you access to asynchronous ports, and you insert it into this slot in the ISR router. And then you will grab an octal cable, which connects to the module, and the RJ45 tips or connectors go into the console port of the devices that you want to control and configure. Going back to this first picture here, you can see they have the network module into the slot of the ISR router, and then the octal cable connected to the module. The RJ45 side of the octal cable goes into a console port of the device that you want to configure. So what is the advantage of this setup? Number 1, if you didn't have the access server and you wanted to configure these devices remotely, you will have to have network connectivity to each one of them, meaning whatever method you use, telnet or SSH, you're going to have to remember the IP address of each one of these devices. And if you have 20, 30, 50 devices, that can become an issue. Instead of doing that, all you have to do is remember one IP address. So you telnet or SSH into the access server, and then the access server can be configured in such a way that it can provide you a menu where you can make a selection number, such as option number 1, option number 2, and so on. And according to the option you choose, this device will perform a something called reverse telnet, which is a telnet command from within the access server. So this device will reverse telnet from within it to the console port of the device that you want to access. And that way you can access as many devices as the route access server can support. So let's take a look at 2 setups that we can have. Well, number 1 is the 2600 ISR, and I want to make sure that you do understand the 2621 ISR or any 2600 series is not the only ISR router that can be configured as a terminal access server. You can pretty much use any ISR. I just thought the 2600 series is a very cheap and accessible router versus a 2800 or something like that. So you don't really need anything fancy. All you're going to do is use it as an access server. So a very cheap router is 2600 that you can use for this purpose. Now this is an old one. Back in the days, I don't even know if I was born, but this device is the AS2511 RJ45 router. This comes pre-manufactured as an access server. So as you can see, this router already has the asynchronous ports. If you think about the 2600, this module is needed to give you access to an asynchronous port. Well, here the asynchronous ports already come built into the router. Now, what are the components that you need for this type of setup? You need an RJ45 to RJ45 rollover cable. Well, not one, I mean one for each device that you want to control. Here's a picture of one of those guys. And last but not least, you need an AUI interface, attachment unit interface. Now, what's the deal with this adapter? This adapter is serial to RJ45. There are AUI adapters that are serial to token ring, serial to FIDI or something of that sort. I don't know what they look like, but what happened is back in the days of the 2511 access server, Ethernet was not a standard yet. So some administrators would use token ring, others would use FIDI, and the only way to be standard compliant was to create a serial port on the router, and then the administrator will have to purchase an adapter that would meet their needs, whether that be using RJ45 or FIDI or token ring or something of that sort. Configuration wise, everything is the same. The only thing that differs is the hardware setup and the type of components that you need for the 2511 or any ISR router. Let me see if there is something that I'm missing here. Okay, so back to the adapter here, the Ethernet interface this adapter will enable on this router is going to be the interface to which you are going to telnet or SSH to access this device. Versus the ISR, well, you can assign an IP address to any of these Ethernet ports and that way telnet or SSH into your device. So this is pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the configuration section of this. I have IOU here set up. I don't really have a physical router. So the way this is set up is I have router 1 and router 2, which you can see in green here. They are connected via serial 2/2. I'm going to assign IP address 192.168.1.1/24 to router 1 and 192.168.1.2 to router 2. Router 1 is going to act as my access server and router 2 will act as my PC. Whatever PC I use to configure devices, let's put it that way. So let's go ahead and start that configuration here. I have router 1. The first thing I want to do is give it a name, something that makes sense to me so that I know that this is an access server. And I'm going to name it, how about just TS, terminal server. Okay, now let me show you the IP address that's already configured. S2/2 has 192.168.1.1 and is up and running. Let's make sure that I can ping my PC. Yes, it did. So the next step will be to determine how I want to allow access to my terminal access server. And here's one thing to consider. You could be in a production environment or you can be in a lab environment. The main thing is you don't want others to be able to access your configurations and make changes to your access server. There might not really be anything important other than a menu, but still, you don't really want people changing your menu, and you will see what I'm talking about once we have this set up. So, how can we configure this in such a way that only I can make changes to my device while allowing access? All the access users will need to use my access server to access other devices and make their configurations. Well, number one, I'm going to create two users, my user account and a guest user account. Okay. Number two, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my user account the highest level of access to my access server, and I will give the guest account the lowest level of access to this device. How do I accomplish that? Well, let's start with my user account. Username Gabe, and I have to say that we have privilege access 15. As you might know, privilege 15 is the highest level of access to a Cisco router. And just for the sake of this example, I'm going to use my name in lowercase letters as the password. And username guest will have privilege 1, which is the lowest one in terms of access to the device. Secret guest. Okay. Next, I'm going to enable SSH because Telnet sends everything in clear text, and that is not secure, and really nobody really uses Telnet anymore, at least when they are concerned with security. So let's go ahead and enable SSH on this device. First thing I need to do is create a domain. I'm just going to call it Cisco, and I'm going to generate my keys. Oh, sorry, I misspelled it. 1024 is a good number. So once I have that, I have SSH enabled on this router. Now I have to allow SSH access into the VTY lines. So let's go ahead and configure that on the VTY lines. Let's just pretend I'm gonna give access to five users at the same time into this device. And sorry, I can't talk and type at the same time. Since this is a lab environment, I'm going to give unlimited access to users into this device, and besides, we don't really want them to be disconnected because they are accessing devices through the access server. So this is actually a good practice. Unlimited access to the VTY lines, and I'm going to use the local database for authentication. And I will only allow SSH. And let's go to the line to the console port as well and do the same. And right now, my guest user can access privilege mode and global configuration mode because I have not enabled security to the privilege mode configuration in the router. So I'm going to say enable secret, and let's say this is password for now. No, Cisco. Of course, you don't want your guest users to know this, okay? So now we are truly secure. What's going to happen is when the guest users log in, they will only have access to the user execution mode in the router. They won't be able to access privilege mode and anything higher than that, so they won't be able to make any configurations. But they have all they need to access the access server, and from there connect to other devices they want to configure. So we have that in place now. The next step we have to do is we need to create a loopback interface and assign it an IP address. I'm just going to say 1.1.1.1/32. Now, the reason for this interface to be needed here is because, like I mentioned before, the access server will perform a method called reverse telnet, which is telnetting from within the access server, and they need to refer to an IP address to perform that function. And that IP address should be a loopback interface. Something configured in a loopback interface, I'm sorry. The IP address you choose or loopback interface you choose is totally up to you. It could be loopback 100, 1000, it doesn't really matter. As long as you have an IP address in place that the access servers can refer to when performing the reverse telnet action. Now we can go ahead and go onto the IP address to port mapping. And I'm going to take a minute to explain how that works. The first thing we need to do is issue a show line. The show line command will tell us what type of access the router supports. As of right now, I only have VTY access to this device, and as you can see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 VTY. So that's my limit anyways. I configure 0 to 4, so that's fine. So we need something called TTY for asynchronous ports, and the reason I don't see that here is because, number one, this is not a physical router. Number two, there is no network module 16A inserted here so that it can enable asynchronous ports. However, I capture a show line output from a real access server. I'm not going to tell you where I got it from, but I got it. So let me show it to you. Here's the router. I changed the name temporarily just to show you guys this. So on that access server, I issued show line, and as you can see here, I have all the TTYs available on this router. So from 33 to 64, it supports around 32 VTY lines. 32 VTY lines. So that means, going back to the first picture here, that means that I can have 4 octo cables connected to that access server. And since each octo cable has 8 cables, individual cables that go to console ports, 8 times 4 is 32. So that's the number of TTY ports or asynchronous ports that this router can support. Okay, now one thing I want to mention here is that some routers will start with TTY33, other routers will start with TTY1, and others TTY62 or 63 or something like that. I did try to find an answer as to why that is. I don't really know. I couldn't find anything convincing enough to say this is why. So I'll just keep it simple, and I'll just say the first available number is going to represent the first physical cable, physical individual cable, the octo cable. Okay, now how do you know which one is the first? Number one, each one of these slots have a number. As you can see, these this little green thing, I don't know how to call that. They're actually numbers over here. I'm sorry I couldn't find a picture that could zoom in that actually and be readable. But on this side you will have numbers 0 through 7, and then over here 7 to 18, 7 to 15, and then here 16 to 23, and here 24 to 32 or something like that. So they're actually a number for you on the module. And the octal cables also have a label on at the tip of the RJ45 connector. And the labels also go from 0 through 7. So that way you know which port, which cable corresponds to what TTY port, to what asynchronous port in the module. Okay, so like I said, you're gonna map this port to the physical individual cable. So how does that work? Let me go down here, and I put some notes here so I didn't forget. We know that Telnet, I hope you know, Telnet uses by default port 23. Now, when the access server performs reverse Telnet, it uses a port number in the range of the 2000, where the last 2 digits are XX. Okay, that XX value equals the TTY number, meaning 33, 34, 40, whatever it is that the router is showing on the show line output. Okay, like the one we see here. So for example, port 33, meaning TTY 33, TTY 33, that's port 33, that maps to connector number 0, labeled on the octal cable RJ45 connector. Okay? Port 34, meaning the second asynchronous port, is going to map to connector number 1, and then 35 to connector number 2, and so on and so forth. So that's how you map the port to the cable. And I also said port to IP address. Well, in my example, I'm using a loopback interface with IP address 1.1.1.1. That's what I have here. So when the access server performs a reverse telnet, it's going to say telnet to 1.1.1.1 itself, is telnetting to itself, but don't use port 23. Use port 2033 or 2034. And what port is it going to use? Well, that depends on the option menu that you build. For example, I can build a menu where I have option 1. When you select option 1, I want you to use port 33. So the router is going to telnet to itself. That is why it's called reverse telnet on IP address 1.1.1.1 port 2033. I hope I've been clear enough as to how this works. Okay? So again, just one more time, my access server is using interface serial 2/2 with this IP address 192.168.1.1/24, and whenever I access the access server and choose an option, it's going to telnet to its loopback interface on whatever port I choose. That depends on the option in the menu, 2034 in this case. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and do the mappings. The syntax to map port to IP address is number 1, IP host, and after this, actually all you have to do is give any name, okay? And I see very helpful to just name it as the labels on the octal cable. So if you look at the tip of each individual cable, you will see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 7. So I'm going to name it octal 0 for the first cable. Okay? But you can do whatever you want. If that first cable is going to connect, let's say, to router 1 or to a 2950 switch, whatever you want to do, you can name it that. But to me, it's easier to identify that the first cable, meaning the one with the label number 0, is going to map to the first TTY. As in this case, I'm pretending this is what I have on my router, but I don't really, but it'll work. So the first TTY here is 33, right? So I'm saying here that cassette is in the range of 2000 XX, where XX equals the TTY number. So the first cable, the one with the label 0, is going to map to port 2033, and that port is going to be mapped to IP address 1.1.1.1. Okay? And that is going to give me access to one device. So I'm going to build this with 3 devices. That should be good enough. I don't want to make it too long, but not too short at the same time. I want you to see and have an idea of how this works. So I'm going to map the second physical cable, which is labeled number 1, to port TTY, to TTY port number, 2034. That will be the second one, according to my show line output, remember, to IP address 1.1.1.1. And for my third device, IP host octal to 2035 1.1.1.1. So that is my port to IP address mapping. And I should say cable to port to IP address mapping. Okay? Now after this, we can go ahead and start building our terminal access server menu. And this is the fun part. You can do really whatever you want, and it's totally up to you. And I'm going to try to make it as pretty as possible so that you can have something that is very user friendly to your guests, and that way minimize the number of questions when you are the only administrator of an access server, as to like, how do I access this, how do I get out of this, and so on and so forth. So you want to make sure you have everything in place to make it as user friendly as possible. So the first thing, since this is going to be accessed remotely, you may want to create a banner, a login banner. And this is totally up to you. Do not log on, or I don't want to scare all of my users. That's fine. I was supposed to make it pretty, but hey, nobody's perfect. So let's go over here. So that's my login banner, and I also want to create a header to my access server menu. So for that, you type menu console title, and whatever I type here is not gonna make much sense because you don't know really, you are not seeing this complete. But once we finish and we go back to this, you will understand why I'm typing this. Okay? So here you can say to access, or choose an option to access desired device, and done issue done choose option, I'm gonna call it option 50, and issue here line X, where X equals TTY. I know this doesn't make any sense to you right now, but just wait until we're done and you will see why I put this here and why choose option 50. Okay, so we have the header for the menu right now. Now let's start building the actual menu. So we can say menu console text, and let's say this is the menu. Or another useful thing is if you have this organized into rows and into rows and gosh, I went blank, but let's say this is row 1, aisle 2 or something like that. I don't really know what your naming conventions are, but you can put whatever you want. I'm just gonna put menu here and continue. And let's create the first option, menu console text. My option number 1, let's say I have a 2950 switch, okay, and I'm gonna put this TTY33 as a reference. And again, once we are done, you will understand why I'm putting this. Right now, even if I explain, won't make any sense to you. Okay, so our first option in our menu is option 1, which is gonna give you access to the switch 2950, and that 2950 is going to use the TTY33. But this part here doesn't really do anything. Okay, this is just going to show in the menu. And just in case I acquire any 2950 switches in the future, and I don't want to come here and rename everything, I'm just going to say A, So if I acquire a second switch, I'm gonna call it B and C and so on. So that will be my first option menu. Then I'm gonna say menu console command. Okay. Once you press option 1, I want you to resume connection to. Remember what is the octal cable that I'm mapping to TTY33? Octal 0. Remember? It's right here. So I want you to resume connection to the first cable, octal 0, and connect via telnet to octal 0. And again, menu console text, this is going to be option number 2, and let's say I have here a 2851 ISR, and that's going to be A, because if I get another in the future, I'm going to call it B, C, and so on and so forth, and that is going to use the TTY number, 34, which is the second one. And then menu console command, when you enter option number 2, I want you to resume connection to octal 1. That's the one mapped to TTY34, and connect telnet octal 1. And by the way, this part here is basically like a programming language. If you hit the question mark, you will have nothing. This is not a command that you can actually enter. It's just like a program, like programming pretty much. Okay, so connect telnet. So key to complete my commands, because octal 1. No way, I misspelled that. By the way, this is case sensitive. So it's actually octal 1. We'll make sure that that is what is going to show here. We show run. Okay, so that's good. And then I'm going to create my option number 3, menu console text number 3. And let's say I am very rich, so I decided to purchase an ASR 9010 router. Wow, okay. I'm going to use TTY 35. Menu console command 3, resume connection to octal 2, connect via telnet octal 2. Okay, so I have my 3 menu options here, and that's what I'm going to build. Next, if you access this server and you choose an option, or all you have is menu option, you won't be able to access the command prompt and make configurations. So you don't want that. Okay, you need to make sure that you have an access back to the iOS prompt. So to do that, menu console text, I'm going to create, and I'm going to say option 50. Why am I saying option 50 here? Well, let's say maybe my company is going to grow and I'm going to be adding more devices, so I want to give some space to the devices that I want to add in the future. So I'm going to make it up to 50 over here. Menu console text 50, and that option is going to be to return to iOS prompt. And once you enter option 50, I want you to issue this command, menu exit. Okay, and one last option here is going to be menu console text 51. This is going to be to exit. to disconnect, to kill your telnet or SSH session from this device. Menu console command 51, that's it. The next two commands that I'm going to enter, I'm going to explain what they do once I show you the menu, because otherwise you won't understand what they do, okay? But you need to enter these two additional commands: menu console status line, that's an actual command, by the way, and menu console line mode, another command, okay? Remind me, well, you can't, but I'm going to come back to this and explain what these two commands do, okay? So let's do some testing here. Again, I'm pretending that this is my computer. Oh, by the way, your access server is usually going to be connected to your network, so you gotta make sure that it's reachable within your company network. So you need to advertise the IP address of the interface you are using to connect to your network. In this case is S2/2, and you need to advertise that via the routing protocol of your choice. Since this is Cisco, you need to use router EIGRP. I'm going to advertise that IP address. Okay. Let's go back to my PC here. Let's make sure I can reach my access server. I'm sure I can. So let's SSH to the access server to see what it looks like. I'm gonna SSH as a guest for now. Well, I see my login banner. Nothing new here, and I actually have just a regular router. Nothing has changed. So what's the point, Gabe? What's the point? And this is my guest user. Let's pretend. Oh, they want to access my device, but they can't. Remember, they only have access to user execution mode, and that is because I gave them the privilege level of 1. Okay, so okay, good. Timed out. I'm going to disconnect from here. Do disconnect 1. Do show session. Okay, good. So I'm disconnected from that session. Now, what are we missing here for us to not see the menu that I just built? Just one more command. You need to go to your line-btys and enter the auto command menu console. Now what this does is, once you SSH into the access server, you will automatically be entered into the menu console, into the menu of the access server. So let's take a look at the difference. Remember, before I only saw a regular router. I didn't see anything different, right? This time I should see an access server. Aha! How do you like that? So this is my login banner, and this is my menu header. Okay, so it says here, choose an option to access desired device. Okay, so if I wanna access the 2950 switch, I just have to type here. Here's my selection prompt. I just have to type 1. Hit enter, and you'll be given access to the console port of the 2950 switch. Or choose option number 2 to the 2851 ISR router, and so on and so forth. Okay, now why did I enter these two commands here, the menu console status line and the menu console line mode? What do? The status line, this is what it does. So let's say I don't really have anything connected here that works. So let's say I'm going to connect to my 2950 switch. So notice here, it's saying trying octal 0 on 1.1.1.1 port 2033. So the status line command basically allows you to see the status of the connection that you're trying to perform here. So once I chose option number 1, the status line gives me this status of the connection, trying, but it didn't work, and that's because I don't really have a switch connected there. So what's the status line command does? Now, the other one, the line mode, the menu console line mode command basically places this selection prompt here. Otherwise, the selection prompt will be missing and you won't be able to enter your menu option. Okay? I'm going to choose 51 to exit for now. Because remember, I am a guest. I logged in as a guest and I don't have administrative access to this device. But this time I'm going to connect as Gabe, which is an admin on this device. And notice, when I choose option 50, which is return to iOS prompt, I am immediately placed into privilege mode, which from here I can access global configuration mode and make changes if I want to, or delete or add and do whatever I want. So that's my point over here on sorry, limiting access to guest users. And that's what the return to iOS prompt option does. It basically places you into the iOS prompt so that you can make configuration changes. From here I can type menu console and I'm going to be put back into the menu. And if I choose, you already saw that 51 will actually terminate the session. But notice the header. The second line, I said when done, that means once you've finished configuring your 2950 switch, you need to exit from it. The way it works is you press Ctrl-Shift-6 and X, and you will be put back into the menu. But the session to this 2950 has not been terminated, which means if another person comes in and tries to access this device is going to be busy and they won't be able to access the device. That is why you need to choose option 50, as it says here. Choose option 50, okay, and issue clear line X, where X equals the TTY. So I'm going to say clear line. The TTY number for this guy is 33. And that's why I put this here in parentheses, just as a reference, just so that I remember that this device is using the TTY number 33. It doesn't really do anything, it's just there for me to use it as a reference. So once I type clear line 33, I hit enter, then it's actually going to terminate the session to that device. Otherwise, anybody else is going to be unable to access it unless they go to option 50 and issue that clear line command. And how do they know if there is a session going on in each of these devices? Well, going back to this, once you do the show line, there's going to be an asterisk next to the TTY number. So the asterisk means that somebody has accessed the TTY number 33. And as you can see here, they are even connected right now because their telnet or SSH session has not been terminated yet. So this is basically how it works. This is everything you need to know for how to configure an access server. I hope you found this useful. Thanks.